we'll just talk for a bit. Mostly I'll just be feeding Jane questions. And then we'll leave lots of time for people to raise questions from the floor. So let me start with the title of the book, Raising Expectations. I know you really like the title. What do you mean by that title?
Hi, let me just say hi first. Hi. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for that terrific introduction. It's such a pleasure to be on this stage in the Steelworkers Hall in Toronto with Sam Gindin. And thank everyone who laid all these chords and blessed them, because they're everywhere, and it looks really good. The title of the book, Raising Expectations, yes. I was telling Sam earlier in the day there was actually a battle with Verso, because we share a publisher now, about it. I was quite insistent on it. When I submitted the book to Verso, it had the title Raising Expectations. It didn't, by the way, have a proposal for my mug on the cover, nor the subtitle that they insisted on it having. But the concept of raising expectations, to me, is multifaceted, and it means a bunch of things. First and foremost, I think, almost in reflection to the Shotwell poem that we just listened to, most people in the world walk around every day being disrespected by people in the power structure, informally, culturally, formally in the workplace, in all sorts of ways. And most people walk around, I think, certainly in US society, most folks walk around with society or the power elite in it trying very hard to ratchet their expectations down every single day of what they should demand and what they should expect. So at the first level, I think, the job of an organizer, and when I say organizer, by the way, I don't mean paid professional, but I do mean someone who thinks consciously about how to expand the army and how to grow the sort of army of people who are fighting for change. I think the first job of an organizer is actually to help ratchet people's expectations up again, that actually we can win, and that actually they're deserving of a much better society than they're generally living in right now. So that's one level of raising expectations. And I think the second level is, it's also sort of a commentary on the value of, I think, how the union I was trained by, which is 1199 New England in the United States, what we think of the value relationship inside the workplace and what it means to struggle, which is to say that for us to succeed, everyone has to be participating as actors, as the central actors in their own sort of salvation in their own struggle. So it's a sort of mixed meaning about raising expectations of what workers will and can do, and also about helping to raise the expectations that people deserve better than they're getting, and that the way to get it is by coming together collectively and struggling.
When you go into a place, given the general sense of demoralization that exists in so many places, how do you start? Where do you begin?
Listening. Certainly, I think one of the most important things organizers do, fundamentally, is listen. And it's active listening, and it's hard listening. And what we're listening for are several things, I think, initially in a conversation. So first of all, let me just say that the methodology that I both was trained in and deeply subscribe to involves tons of human contact and one-on-one engagement and one-on-one conversations initially with people. And there are several things that we're listening for in that conversation. One is we're listening to what matters to each and every person that we're having a conversation with. And I really mean what matters. And for example, I'm not going to leave a conversation with anyone initially in any campaign or thinking about any campaign. I'm simply not going to leave a conversation. I'm not even going to leave the early part of the conversation until I have pulled out, if it was hard to do, maybe pulling it out, but I'm not going to leave any conversation until I understand what matters to you, the person I'm actually having a conversation with. Because I think it's hard, in the US we have employer fights, boss fights, that really are, vicious and brutal, fairly often, if not often. And this sort of gets to later in the conversation, perhaps, but the way that I think as an organizer and the way I've trained lots of people as organizers, if we don't understand what matters to each and every single person heading into a campaign from the very opening, the very first part of the conversation, we're not going to succeed in holding them through tougher moments in the campaign later on. Because there is a very important quality of individual self-interest, where most people start when we meet them. And how we help, the job of an organizer, how we help both raise expectations that we can actually win, paid parental leave, the right to retire, that the boss on the third shift isn't going to treat you like a horrible person every minute of the day. Whatever the thing is, we have to know what it is to be able to hold them through a vision that is drilled into them, that we can individually solve things versus that collectively is actually the only way to build power and solve things. So how we start, I think, is by listening, fundamentally. And then we quickly move in something we call the 7 steps to a successful organizing conversation. We quickly would move into a lot of expectation raising and agitation around the core issues. But the issues are different for every single person because every single worker is actually their own person and different things matter to them. So understanding what they are and then helping people collectivize that the solution is collective and not individual is where we start every conversation.
You've really emphasized having respect for all workers, but you've also emphasized the importance of leadership. So say something about the relationship between spontaneity and leadership, and how this question of respect for all workers, but also identifying leaders, relates to all of this.
Yeah, good. So I would say also in a first conversation, kind of literally if we were mapping out a campaign to build what I like to think of as a high participation, active union, a real union, actually help workers build a powerful organization. In those same very first conversations, the organizers are doing a few things, besides hearing the issues, besides beginning to learn about who Sam is, if Sam's the person I'm having a conversation with, and where Sam came from, and what matters to Sam. We're also trying to figure out who what we call the organic leader is in every single unit, in every single workplace. With the idea that in every shift, and I spent a lot of my years, most of my years, I started out organizing with janitors, nursing home workers, a whole variety of hotel workers, a whole variety of workers, but I really spent the majority of my time in the labor movement organizing hospitals in what we call a wall-to-wall model, meaning all the workers in the hospital, no separate divisions of the workers in a different union. And in every shift and in every unit, right, these are 24/7 operations, in every shift and in every unit, there's something called the organic leader. And the organic leader is really who most of the workers turn to, who are in some simple way who they follow in a campaign. And I have to say that this definitely rubs against the grain of some of the sort of dialogue that's come out from the Occupy movement in New York about leaderless organizations and horizontalism, and I think there's a lot of confusion about some of this. But in every workplace, there is something called the organic leader, which is who coworkers look to. That's all. And it's never obvious. It's never obvious who this person is initially. And in the school of organizing that I was trained in and that I've trained people in, the only people who can identify the organic leader in every shift in every workplace are the workers themselves. It's not possible for staff people or for any outsider to identify who the organic leader is. It's only through listening and conversation that we begin to understand who that person is. And they're the foundation of building powerful worker committees that can then lead to self-organization and a victorious campaign. So the role of finding the organic leader, which is something I talk a lot about for people who haven't seen the book Raising Expectations, I spend a great deal of time on this question of the central role of the organic leader. And then the role of the organizer is really to train and develop the leadership capacity of the organic leader, because it's the organic leader, frankly, certainly in a private sector union fight in America, where we're arrested if we go anywhere near a facility. Our job is to train them with every single thing we know, because they've got to run the campaign and carry the campaign on the inside, because we're not there, because it's illegal, because we can't touch the property, the parking lot, or go anywhere near the place where the cops are called every day. So in our model, it's really about identifying the organic leaders in every shift and work site, and then beginning to coach them. I sort of like the theme of we had the coach somewhere in the Shotwell poem too, but I think that our role at that point is to coach people on how to build radical self-organization that's good enough to challenge a vicious employer campaign.
When you were doing the work in Nevada, a right-to-work state, it was especially important to develop that kind of leadership, given everything you're up against. how successful were you in that reproducing itself once you left? What happened after you left in terms of the leadership there?
I think that once we develop good leaders, frankly, they stay being good leaders. If we've done literally what we try to do, which is essentially teach them the skill of organizing. The same exact skill that we would put ourselves through is the skill that they're going to try and self-replicate inside the work site. And it's not, I just want to clarify this for a minute, it's not like the leadership process doesn't ever stop, ever. So even once we've identified an organic leader who has a following and who has workers who turn to them and who look to them for counsel and as people who can help build their confidence, the process of constantly developing new leaders, of constantly unearthing new leaders, of finding and developing new campaigns, because certainly our philosophy is that the best school, the site of school and training, are active fights and campaigns, that people absolutely learn best in struggle. And by the way, I also learned that the average worker doesn't want to, even though we fantasize about revolution, the average worker doesn't punch the clock every day to have revolution. Not most of them. They sometimes want to go to work and just have a peaceful day and take care of their patients or whatever else too, right? So it's important that there's a balance. So we're constantly looking for ways to produce and generate and have a reproduction process taking place, so that more and more leaders are being developed. And part of how we do that is by the model of representation that goes on between contract fights, from the organizing drives in the contract fight. And that model involves something very different than what looks like a traditional grievance process. It involves doing a lot of direct action, daily, weekly, monthly, to resolve employer bad behavior or other issues going on in the workplace. So it's something outside of the traditional grievance process that continually develops new leaders and unearths new leaders, but also something different, which is taking up really important issues outside of the workplace, issues like transportation and housing and fights that take place in the broader community, where we're often able to develop a whole new, identify and then develop a whole new layer of worker leaders as they take root in the community and begin to get active in different issues. So it's not a static process. We don't sort of find them, we found you, train them, move on. It's an endless teaching and coaching and reproduction model. So in Nevada right now, there's a ton of worker leaders, some of whom emailed me this morning because of something that had to do with Chattanooga and the UAW. And we're still in really fun, active discussions online, by email, by crazy text messages. And they're just phenomenal worker leaders.
I want to get back to that later, the question of how do you really generalize this rather than make this kind of organizing exceptional. But let me get back to a couple of things. Can you say something about organizing in Nevada, organizing our right to work state? I think at some point I don't know if it was in this context, you said screw labor law. And there's a lot of people here that are worried about Canada following the US in terms of right to work.
Yeah, so again, I think that, let me just say a couple things. I think the first thing is the best way to get ready, for those who fear that right to work might be somewhere lurking nearby, the best way to defeat a fear of right to work, by the way, is just to start acting like you're in a right to work country. Because it forces us to build what I think of as high participation union models. I think the basic argument I'm trying to make in the book and in real life, having spent 4 years building a union in a right to work state, in the US we call them red states, the right to work states. These are controlled by Republicans or forces that are generally hostile to worker organization, and where workers can decide to be in the union, around the union every day. So one thing that, there's a lot of horrible things about being in a right to work state. There just are. It's just generally not, it's not a warm and fuzzy place to be, initially. On the other hand, I think what I came to appreciate about being in a right to work state is you definitely don't need a pollster because you know your approval numbers every day. Like, every single day, workers are deciding to pay dues or not. So guess what you have a really good sense of? If they believe in their union, if they own their union, if they think it's their union, or if they really have no interest in it at all. So when I got to Nevada, the range of membership percentages in some shops ranged from 4% to 22% to 26%. And we did have one shop, the county unit, the sort of long-time public sector, old county government building shop, that was holding steady at about 48%. That was the high watermark in one place. And the numbers really were, you know, in the teens and 20s and a couple of single digits in most. You know, and what I experienced very quickly is if you begin to have a really straight, honest conversation with a bunch of workers, if you're having a conversation with them, and you start out doing what I described first, which is finding out what matters to them, and all different things matter. Everyone has different issues. Young workers have different issues than older workers, and middle, and gender, and people of color, and there's a million different things out there. But our job is to help raise expectations that we can find a collective solution to all of them, right? Which is building power. And I found it very straightforward early on, thinking. So I come from being in, you know, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, California, all these states where, you know, the dues just came in, by the way. You sort of assumed people were kind of with you, you know, in this representation model. And I think that workers very quickly understood something very basic about power, which was, I hear Sally wants to win this, Sam wants to win that, George wants to win this. And then, you know, if you said to a worker, do you think when we sit down with the employer, since the employer knows exactly what the membership percentage is, do you think the employer is going to give a union with 50% of people paying dues to it anything? Anything, literally, right? And we began to say that the membership participation, which starts with paying dues and making local contributions and then showing up and being active and then taking control and running things, that there's a direct relationship between what we can win at the bargaining table or in the city hall or in the county office building, but especially in the opening conversations, there's a direct relationship between what we can win at the bargaining table and how unified and united and powerful you are as a group of workers. And since the boss deducts dues, until they didn't, by the way, which was heading into a big strike in several of these pictures, until the boss decided they were no longer collecting dues in Nevada, which made it more complicated, you know, workers got it, really fundamentally. And the next phase of it was us telling workers, in the most basic way, you know, we're not in the workplace. And again, in the private sector in America, you're not touching ground into the workplace. So the only way we're going to get these membership numbers significantly high enough to win anything is by peer-to-peer, worker-to-worker conversations, and by workers beginning to really own their union and build it anew and build it from the ground up. And I think having real conversations about what power is, what the power structure looks like, what it takes to really win something significant in a right-to-work state, in neoliberalism, under a completely failed labor law regime in the United States of America, where I think I might have said something worse or more blatant than that. I'm known for saying screw labor law on a daily basis because it doesn't get American workers really anything. So we broke the law a lot. We were occasionally punished for that by employers when they stopped collecting dues and all sorts of things. And the workers won, by the way, anyway, right? There were key moments when we had to just say screw the law and break it, which wasn't a daily habit, but it was sometimes necessary.
Another issue that was really important in Nevada was that you were able to get nurses into a general union, into an industrial type union model, which was relatively unique, and overcome that kind of craft mentality that exists amongst teachers working in schools as well. How did you do that? How did that happen in Nevada?
You know, this is funny. Hi Stephanie. I did a little talk today at York too, waiting at Stephanie from the earlier talk, where we spent some time on this. And and then I had the pleasure. My chauffeur today was this guy named Leo Panich. What a great chauffeur! Seriously, thank the chauffeur. Anyway, but we were driving around today. And it was super fun. And Leo said the same thing. You know, it was sort of like, how'd that happen? And I think I don't focus that much on how that happened because it seemed so natural to us that it did happen. And I think that's part of the lesson. I think that we approached the concept of union building in several ways. One was that flying in the face of the national union that I was then working for, the Service and Placement National Union, or the trend line of the national union, we believed that I was trained in and we were schooled in and we believed in building very powerful worksite-based organization. That worker self-organization in the workplace was fundamental to building power. And if you start with the idea that the foundation of a strong union is a highly organized workplace where workers come together and make decisions and have power and exercise power together, then it leads to this very logical conclusion, which is that everyone's got to be in the same union. So for us, it was sort of this very, we didn't approach it any differently than that. And we didn't get a lot of resistance from people because we were forming new unions. We were reforming an old part of the union, but we were also forming new unions. But even when we had to rebuild parts of a sort of moribund union, it was a little bit more challenging, but not a lot more challenging. And here's why, because people had crappy, where they did exist, they had really crappy contracts, which were from a pay scale, sometimes below the trend line of the fancy new hospitals in town. We were going to organize the entire market, every single facility. And we had 3 hospitals that had contracts when we got there with single digit and double digit, like 22% membership in the hospitals. And it was a really easy conversation, which was, there's no power. There's no power here. We have no power. So again, if we want to win, the single best thing we can do is have everyone fighting together against, in our case, some pretty awful employers. Nevada is typically run by a bunch of giant for-profit. I hope you don't even have them here. Even my home state of New York doesn't have them, by the way. The state of Massachusetts doesn't have them. So whole states in the United States don't have for-profit hospitals. It's not even legal. In the Wild West, and in the right-to-work states where these SOBs live, thrive like in a bad petri dish, they're everywhere. And in Nevada, the for-profit hospitals were totally dominant. And they're really horrifically awful employers to the workers and to the patients, by the way. So it became a very simple discussion about if we want to deliver high-quality health care, which, by the way, last I looked, most of the registered nurses wanted to do one thing fundamentally every day, which was be able to meet the promise of what they were learning in nursing school, which was to take care of patients. And they simply weren't allowed to take care of patients in these hospitals because the conditions were so awful. And the question of then how to unify, how to build enough power to be unified enough to win at the table and win the right to do good care giving was only going to come if all the workers were working together. And most registered nurses that we worked with understood it took a whole team to deliver good care, and it made a lot of sense then. We said, well, if it takes a really good whole team to deliver really good patient care, you need the tech to be functioning at a high level, you need the food to come up in the dietary department right, you need to not have sugar going to a patient who would die from it. You need every step of the system to work right. Well, if every step of the system has to work right to deliver high quality care, it makes sense that we're going to deliver the best quality care if we sit down as one big union when we go into bargaining with the employer. And it really wasn't a difficult decision for the workers there to sign on to a wall-to-wall methodology. We organized 7 hospitals back-to-back over 3 years in Nevada in very rough conditions, and all of them were wall-to-wall situations where the workers fought together and won together.
That's really interesting because I can think of examples where the response of nurses would be, we've got some power on our own, or the employer is quite ready to buy them off and give them something if they don't do this. And it's interesting. I can understand it if you're organizing in a new place, but where there's already a craft culture, it seems to me it would be really difficult.
Maybe had they had good standards, it would have been even harder. But since the standards were so crappy, it was like, there's nowhere to go but up, kids. Really, seriously. I wasn't walking, I didn't have the pleasure in my entire life in the labor movement, by the way, of someone saying to me, please take this shop, it's 100% union, it's in really good shape, 95% are paying dues, and they have a lot of power. That was not the jobs I was given. Just want to be clear about that. It was, this place is falling apart, no one has any power, the workers are running over the boss is running over the workers, or there are no workers, unions, one of the two. And definitely, when we were organizing facilities from the ground up, from the first time up, it is a lot about small L leadership and political education. Meaning, what are the values that we walk into those first conversations with? And I think it's very easy to face a group of professional workers, if you want to, and agitate them that they're professionals and that they're super special and that everything they do is super special and they should be all alone in their own union. I think that's easy work, to be perfectly honest. I think it's hard work, and it's incumbent upon us to build solidarity in a way that has different outcomes in terms of workers' class politics. But I am really arguing from fairly recent experience in the United States where people think that the ethic of the individual, is so all-powerful. It didn't take a lot of conversations to get people in a real, honest, hard conversation about how to become powerful enough to win the kind of changes they wanted, to quickly arrive at this conclusion that by standing all together that we were going to do better. And it sounds simplistic, and I'm not sure how else to describe it except to say that it mattered what the conversations were that we were having. And I told this story today, and it's really true. From the very first bargaining table when I began to negotiate contracts and became a chief negotiator in the union, had we not done really good front-end solidarity work long before we got to the bargaining table, we would have been so screwed. Because I'd never been in hospital bargaining, not at least in round one with the employer. Once they knew us, they maybe changed their tactics, but never meeting an employer at the table for the first time did I not have the experience. Once we had a little power, once we'd done the first sticker up or a button up or something was going on to show some unity and power, where the employer didn't walk in and say, okay, the nurses are going to get 8% because they're so special and they're so important and we value them so much and they're at the center of the patient care in this hospital, and everyone else is going to get 2 or 3%. Every time. Every time. So, you know, if you haven't done the prep work to have people ready for that conversation, for the level of division, and then we're going to divide them by Filipino and white, and we're going to divide them by immigration status, and then, well, they're much more important because they're from here, and then they speak a different language, and then, you know, all the crap that the boss throws out at you to divide every single worker in the facility. But it starts with professional, not professional, in that kind of setting. And, you know, we routinely had registered nurse, you know, we take a caucus, and our pattern was routinely take a caucus, smile, you know, stand there, take a caucus, have a really good raucous discussion in the caucus with the boss far down the hallway, come back in and have 20 of the top nurses in the hospital stand up one by one and explain why, in fact, they didn't deserve any more, and that we were appreciative that they were going to give everyone 8%. Or we'd split the difference and take 6% across the board. And that was the most important thing to do, was to have the nurses themselves just hand it right back to the employer.
So you were successful. Why isn't it being generalized? Why is what you're describing so rare in the U.S.? You can whisper your answer.
I warned you, this is not my specialty. You know, what I definitely feel really good about is understanding how to help coach lots of workers into militant radical self-organization and winning. Solving the problem of some of the larger ineptitudes of what's happening at the top of the unions is not my specialty, which is probably why I'm sitting in Canada chatting with you at the moment, and why I'm taking a break in grad school and reading some history books at the moment. But you know, I think we have some really significant problems that I'd rather ask Sam Gindin about, and probably half the audience about, but about how we sort of work to overcome the sort of oligarchic tendencies or the lethargy that sets in among the union leaders. But I think there are some things that are very real and very difficult. It's too simple to just say, you got a bunch of bad guys at the top, and the death rate isn't fast enough to change the top of the leadership. Seriously, you know, it just takes a long time. Medical practices are getting better. This is not good in terms of labor change. But really, what I found difficult was the process.
Blaming the nurses for good care.
Exactly. Not the nurses, the whole hospital. It takes a whole hospital to do good care. What I did think was problematic at times, actually difficult, was particularly the process of the transition of rank and file worker leaders coming out to become full-time officers. You could almost begin to see that the conditions were so awful sometimes in the workplace that almost no one ever wanted to go back into their workplace. And I think that's a really deep issue. I think I'm not sure that in sort of general politics, outside of the labor movement, outside of trade union politics, I think I was never really in favor of things like term limits, but I actually think I'm becoming in favor of them everywhere, including in the union shop. That people can run for one term of office. And that there's really high accountability in transitions on things like even, you know, professional staff, full-time officers, anyone who's in a full-time position in the labor movement, that's a pretty plum place to be, even if we're working 20 hours a day. It's pretty, in my opinion, it's pretty incredible work. Like, I remember when I was young, I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna get paid to do this, you know what I mean? This is crazy. It's so great, it's so much fun. What could be better than being an organizer? So, but I do think that we have more thinking to do about the structural things that constrain or enable the sort of lethargy that settles in. And I know that some of us had tried to raise the position inside of the National Union, SAU in this case, that no one should be able to stay in Washington, D.C. in the headquarters for more than one term, like 4 years. That staff had to go back into the field, that officers had to go back into the field, that, so I think there are little tactical things that we can do that help. But I definitely don't have the meta answer to how we deal with the level of change that we need. I do think that building new unions, not new from scratch, but each time that we organize workers anew to form a new union, like in Nevada, the transition happened fairly quickly. Once we had 7 new hospitals worth of workers who had never been in what I called a bad union, you just set a whole different discussion about what the terms were for a good union. Although then you have a union come in from out of state and start raiding, and crisis starts, and it's just a mess. So I was hoping Sam Gindin and a bunch of you would have the answer to that problem. But I think it's hard. But I have a lot of faith in workers, and I think that we can do better at this. I don't think it was my strong suit, honestly.
Just before we leave that, but when you talk about the problem, you're not just talking about the problem in Washington or in the national office. You're talking about the local level. Yeah. You're talking about bureaucratization of stewards. So part of rotating people isn't just that it gets around bureaucracy, but it's also a way of learning. Yeah. By having more people go through it.
It's also learning. I should say one more thing about that too, because we were trying this in Nevada at the local level. There were plenty of local fiefdoms, across our country where the behavior was just as self-congratulating and sort of worker self-defeating as the next. So we did a lot of things. One was the direct action model in the workplace, I think helps a lot. Sort of not codifying the steward or the chief steward as some kind of special lawyer status in the workplace, I think mattered. We created something called captains and a captain structure, and we created a model where the member organizer in the work site had just as many rights and privileges and at least as much prestige as the steward, for sake of argument. And the job of the rank and file member organizer, collaborating with a steward, was to do contract enforcement, but to do it in a direct action way. So having direct action in the workplace and having people who were called organizers among the rank and file, whose job was to constantly stir up mobilization models inside the workplace, that was one way I think that helped mitigate against the sort of idea of these stewards settling in, or chief stewards for 100 years, who become sort of the local lawyer, and who begin to codify this model of sort of, I can sit down better with management, let me take care of this problem. Because that model leads us to dead ends. And the model of, I'd rather you not sit down and work out this problem with management without me in the room. I'd rather have 30 of us walk down the hall together and demand a meeting right now and get this idiot fired if that's what we need to do, meaning whoever the supervisor is, which we did. Like, we prided ourselves on firing bad managers through direct action. And sometimes it took a lot of direct action to do it. But so that, I think, does actually help. And I think in Nevada we were doing that very well. And it was a conscious part of how do we not have this model evolve where a steward is really great in year 1 and by year 3 has developed this rapport with the unit manager and they're just going to go fix stuff. It's not healthy for an active union or for an activist union. So that was one way we did it. And having, another way, I think, frankly, was we had this very democratized process of collective bargaining, which was open and transparent. And I don't mean just open, there's pictures up there of this for a reason. We had very large negotiations, and I think transparency also helped keep the model more accountable. It wasn't that there were 3 or 4 special workers who went off and on high, like the Wizard of Oz, came back and delivered a package you could vote on several months later. You want to see what we're doing at the bargaining table? By the way, it's going to be better if you show up today. Because when we get to your unit, I don't know what the hell you do actually, phlebotomist, so come and talk about it with the boss, right? So really, like super clear every day, I can't possibly describe every single work description, and we're going to talk about you at work, so why don't you come and talk about it with us? So keeping transparency in the most important decision making, which was often the collective bargaining process, also helped stave off the tendency towards unilateral specialdom for a handful of people. And I think the more we're conscious about that process, the better off we are.